Select Committee will come to order. Just a quick outline of where we are today. It's 11 o'clock. Regular standing committees begin meeting at 12:30. I'm sure everyone would like to have lunch, so if possible, leaving a few minutes early to allow for some transit time would be good. I'm going to just describe briefly what a Select Committee is, do a quick round of introductions, and get right into our testifiers, if that makes sense. Members, Minnesota, the legislature of Minnesota has not had a Select Committee appointed since the early 1990s. And the last Select Committee was the Select Committee on the recession. And they were charged, it was a bipartisan committee, charged with investigating the impact of the recession in Minnesota and what policies the state could take, or what actions the state could take and what policies we could adopt in order to address the recession. One interesting thing about it is if you read their report, they were proposing things that we are still debating today, including an angel investor tax credit was one of the things that they first talked about. But in general, a Select Committee's mission is to research, investigate, report, and propose legislation. The role of a Select Committee is not to hear bills, pass bills, or recommend that the legislature, or send bills to the legislature to pass into law. So that is our overall mission. So I was hoping to get the other two DFLers in the committee to be here for introductions, but we'll just get started, I think. And we'll go around the room, have everyone introduce yourselves, and my hope is that you can tell us a brief bit about yourself, including what your first job was. So let's just start with Jeff.
All right. Mr. Chair and members, my name is Jeff Diebel. I'm in House Research. I've been there 12 sessions. And my first job was as an attorney in a private practice. And I'll be the
age of 16?
Yeah, I wish. And I'll be the backup research for this. Anita Neumann will be the primary researcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Joe Radinovich. I represent District 10B in Crow Wing and Aiken County. My first job was as a youth baseball coach and kids camp instructor at Rutgers.
My name is Matthew Bergeron. I'm the committee administrator for this committee, and my first job was as a caddy at a country club.
Good morning, Ryan Winkler, Golden Valley. I represent District 46A, which includes Golden Valley, St. Louis Park, part of Plymouth, and the community of Medicine Lake. My first job was stocking shelves at a discount retailer called Pamida in Bemidji.
I'm Cole Trace, the committee legislative assistant. I'm from Apple Valley, live in St. Paul. My first job was at the Minnesota Zoo, the pride of Apple Valley. I was part of the concessions crew that was there. I didn't feed the animals.
Hi, I'm Representative Andrea Kiefer from the Woodbury area. I'm probably the oldest one at this table here, and so I can't really remember my first job. No, I'm just kidding. I think it was at Burger King. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Jennifer Loon from Eden Prairie, and I think my first job, I was 15. I grew up in South Dakota in a small little farming community, and I had a summer job cleaning the school during the summer. So I scrubbed toilets and painted and did maintenance jobs. And I motivated myself to complete life-saving training so I could be a lifeguard the next summer.
Patrick Groffel, I'm in my 5th term. I represent Farmington and portions of rural Dakota and Goodhue counties. My first job is my family used to go to the races on Saturday and Sunday at Elko Speedway and Raceway Park. And so while my family would watch the races, I would sell the checker flag racing news for 50 cents, and I would keep 25 cents, and then the people who made the papers would get 25 cents. And then after that, I would go into the grandstand with a garbage bag and collect beer and pop cans and bring the cans home and recycle them. So that was my first little job, and the best part about it was the only job I ever had that was tax-free. So.
And the statute of limitations has run out. Yeah. Representative Ward and Allen, we are just doing introductions, so we've been all around. It's back to you, and the request is to just briefly describe your district and tell us what your first job was.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. and guests. I'm Joanne Ward. I'm representing District 53A, which is western, northwestern Woodbury, South Maplewood, south part of Oakdale, and all of Landfall. The district is very mixed. You know, the typical image of Woodbury is mostly east of me, and I represent the older part of Woodbury. And in terms of employment, it just runs the gamut, really does run the gamut. My first job, wow. How far back do you want to go? You know, besides babysitting and those kinds of things, I think my first real job was retail, working in a shop for children and maternity clothing.
Great. Representative Allen.
I apologize for being late. My voice is a little bit gone. It's Susan Allen. I'm District 62B, and it's South Minneapolis. And before redistricting, I haven't looked at the demographics after it, but about 60% is living in poverty. And so it's a diverse, mixed income now, and we now have Tangletown, so it is even broader now. And so that's been interesting. How and so as far as the employment situation, it's some small businesses, and we with the light rail and improving public transportation. I think the economic outlook is a little better for our community, but many of them are teachers and social workers and people that are working for social justice and very committed. And so I'm very proud to represent the South Minneapolis. My first job, I remember, I was probably 13, 14, and it was the federal program, the CERT program. I don't know if everyone remembers that. And so it was at a thrift shop, and that was in I don't know what year that was.
You don't have to tell us. Just a kind of a quick mention of what the construct of this committee is, how we plan to proceed. My plan, and this is, of course, very much subject to your thoughts and guidance as well, but my plan is that we will spend most of this legislative session getting a baseline of understanding about what's going on in the economy, the drivers of growth, projections of wages by occupation category and other things, to get a basic understanding of what's happening from a kind of academic or policy standpoint. The second part of this session will focus on discrete individual issues that are likely to come before the legislature this year. One of the example of that is there are various minimum wage bills that have been introduced so far, and on the 25th of February we're going to have a joint hearing with the Labor Committee to consider the impacts of various minimum wage proposals, on what an economic impact that would have in Minnesota. We will probably have a second day of testimony on that 2 days later with the Labor Committee, and have an opportunity for people to come and testify from members of the public and others. So that's just an example of the kind of dive into a discrete issue. My hope is that we can issue some reports along the way this session, short reports based on what we're hearing or learning in the committee, and roll that up at the end of the session with some additional investigation into the whole question of whether there is strong enough consumer demand in the economy versus kind of the supply type of arguments that we're hearing, and the impact of various job subsidy programs and things like that. In the interim, my hope is that we will spend some time in different parts of the state hearing from actual real Minnesotans about their experiences in this economy and what their, both businesses and workers, what their prospects look like, how their lives are affected by the wages that are paid in the economy. That will roll through the interim, and my hope is that we will be able to complete a report back to the legislature in the first part of 2014, which may serve as some guidelines or some recommendations from this committee for action by the legislature in 2014. So that's the basic kind of outline. I don't know if anybody has questions or ideas about that now, but otherwise our time is somewhat limited, and we have two great testifiers. So if there are no questions, we'll proceed to the State Demographer. And both Ms. Brower and Dr. Stinson have agreed that we can ask questions as we go along. So, as a member, I think it's better to get the question out when it occurs to you as you're looking through a slide. So we'll be on the lookout for questions as they go through, and hopefully we can generate a lot of discussion. My hope is that we'll have a lot of conversation as we get started this session. So, without further ado, please identify yourself for the record and proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members. My name is Susan Brower. I'm the State Demographer, and I work in the Department of Administration. I've been asked to present information today about how Minnesotans' incomes have changed over the past few decades. So I'll begin by showing you how household and family incomes have changed and how employment has changed, and then I'll move into talking about how incomes are distributed across the spectrum and how that income distribution has changed over time. I'll conclude by talking about the characteristics of our very lowest income Minnesotans. So median household income in the state has declined over the course of the last decade. Since 2000, our median household income declined from $63,600 to just under $57,000 in 2011. This 2011 median is very close to what it was in 1990 after it's adjusted for inflation. The period in the gray bar marks the most recent recession, the Great Recession, and as you can see, median income began declining before the start of the recession and continued to decline since it ended. Minnesota continues to have a median income that is higher than the rest of the nation or the nation overall. This has been the case for the last couple of decades. We fare relatively well compared to the U.S. on a lot of economic and social indicators, and we'll see that more in my presentation later on. In comparison with other states, we ranked 11th in the highest median income, highest to lowest, in 2011. Of course, there are variations across the state geographically. The differences in the state with respect to median household income reflect both the availability of jobs, the type of jobs in any given county, and also resident preferences about where to live and work. The darkest blue counties in these maps are the counties with the highest median incomes, those with medians of $56,000 and above. And you can see that the higher household medians are concentrated in the Twin Cities metro, around the Twin Cities, the exurban counties surrounding the Twin Cities, and the counties extending south toward Rochester. If we look at the residents with the very lowest incomes, those with incomes below the federal poverty threshold, we see that poverty has been increasing in Minnesota. Our most recent estimates show that more than 1 in 10 Minnesota residents live in poverty, 12%. The poverty threshold is the official measure of poverty, and that's what we're looking at here. The dollar amount below which someone is considered to be in poverty varies depending on the age of a householder, of a family member, and also the composition of a house. But just to give you a sense of the level that we're talking here, in 2011, the federal poverty threshold was $22,800 for a family of 4 with 2 adults and 2 children. Again, with respect to poverty, as with median income, Minnesota fares well compared to the nation as a whole. We consistently have had lower poverty rates, and we rank 11th in the lowest percent of poverty compared with other states. So what we're looking at here is a snapshot, several snapshots in time, and it gives us an idea of how many residents at any given time are in poverty. But if we follow people over time, a slightly different picture emerges.
Ms. Brower?
Yes.
One question I have. In both your poverty slide and in your median income slide, you show basically Minnesota doing better than the nation throughout that period, but tracking it, trends being the same, except during the 1990s, where in both slides it appeared that Minnesota did significantly better than the nation and was improving over time. Do you have data that goes back earlier so that, was the 1990s truly an aberration, or was there more variability? historically?
We've fared well historically throughout. Whether the poverty rate was lower prior to that, I would have to check that and get back to you. It began being measured in 1960, and so there's not too much more history before that.
Thank you.
Yep. Past studies that have tracked residents, individuals over time, have found that poverty is a relatively short-term phenomenon. So for the vast majority of people, incomes fall below that poverty threshold. They've been able to find a way out relatively quickly. So for the majority of people, 70% nationally are in poverty less than 8 months at a time. And the data that I'm showing you are from 2004 to 2006. It's from the most recent data that are available right now. The distribution may look somewhat different once we get an update to these data. The poverty spells likely have increased since the recession. But I just wanted to give you an overall sense of what people's experience typically is with poverty, moving in and out of poverty. A very small proportion, just over 10%, experiences spells of poverty that are more than 2 years. So if this...
Ms. Brower?
Yes.
Excuse me, Representative Radinovich.
Yes, my question, Mr. Chair, and to our testifier is the duration of poverty spells. So I understand that, as the graph shows, that most people come in and out within 2 to 4 months. Do we have information as to whether most of those people exist just directly above that threshold, or is it a significant decrease in income that would put them into that state, and then they find employment and get out?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chair, Representative, most people in poverty are hovering right around that mark, so there may be, but there are also those who have a job loss and then are able to find work again somewhere middle income or above. So both exist in there, but I would say the majority are those who are hovering right around that threshold mark.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
So if this experience of poverty is relatively temporary, how is it that people enter into this situation? The most common event, as I just mentioned, is a job loss or a pay cut. This accounts to 40% to 50% of those who experience poverty. How do people exit? Again, gaining a job, increasing wages or income is the most likely. There are other events that also trigger these changes. Changes in household structure, having a baby, for example, is one of the triggers that move people into poverty, a larger family size, a shift from a two-parent household to a single-parent household. So far, we've been looking at data for people in poverty. This is the group of Minnesotans with the very lowest incomes. If we use a broader definition of low-income residents, those with a family income twice the federal poverty threshold, we see that this group has been increasing as well. To be included in this income group, a family of 4 would have to have an income of less than $45,600. So I'm showing you these incomes, the poverty level, those with very low incomes, and then this 200% level, just to give you a sense of how broadening the definition of low income potentially changes the population in Minnesota that would be impacted by lower wage jobs. Also at around 200%, there are state and federal programs that families and children are eligible for. In 2011, in this group, at 200% of the federal poverty level, there were about 28% of residents that fit into this category, or 1.4 million Minnesotans. This is the highest percentage in 3 decades. In 1980, Minnesota had a similar but slightly lower proportion of its residents in this low-income category. So as I mentioned earlier, most people move below the poverty threshold because they have a job loss or they lose a pay cut. As you would expect, there's this close relationship between jobs, wages, and the number of Minnesotans in poverty or low income. So let's look at what's happening with employment in Minnesota in the last couple of decades. The share of working age Minnesotans who are employed has declined since 2000. In 2011, 75% of all working age Minnesotans aged 16 to 64 were employed, and this is either full or part-time. And in 2000, that percentage was just under 80%.
Ms. Brower, excuse me, do you have any sense of actual numbers instead of a percent? I mean, how many actual individual people does that represent?
Does it represent? So 75% is close to 3.93 million to 4 million people employed, yes. And this is any kind of employment. It can be full employment.
Okay, thank you.
83% of Minnesotan working age adults are either looking for work or working, compared to 77% of the nation overall. So we have a really high labor force participation rate here in the state. We rank fourth compared to other states in the number of adults who participate in the labor force, either working or looking for work. So the graph that we're looking at here shows the people who worked at all for any length of time during the period that they were asked in the survey. They could be in jobs where they're on payroll, self-employed employment on farms. But if we look at the proportion who reported working full-time in 2011, that proportion is closer to 56% for men, 46% for women, again higher than the national average, but much lower when we're talking about year-round full-time work. So with the recession, there's been a decline in those working at all, those who are fully employed working year-round, and a decline in full-time work as well. There are a number of reasons why adults don't work. The largest percentage of people not working are there because they're caring for children. That's 26%, or other family members, or they have a chronic illness or disability. These two groups alone account for over half of the proportion of those who aren't working. These data, again, come from the Survey of Income and Program Participation. They're for the U.S., and they're numbers from 2004. The most recent numbers published now, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what this distribution looks like, because I think it's instructive to get kind of the whole spectrum of people's ability and preferences to work.
Ms. Brower, excuse me, Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Brower, thank you. I just had a question. Looking at the previous chart, and then this, I'll call this the pie chart. Can you break that out by men and women for those various categories? And if you don't have it right now, if you could submit it, but I'd be interested in seeing that.
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, and I can send them to you, but it's much higher among women, the child care proportion, closer to 40% for women. That's the reason for not working, and much lower percentages for men in that category.
Please proceed. Ms. Brower, we have another question. Representative Ward.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Brower, I wondered, it's kind of just a curiosity thing, what's the, how would you characterize the not interested in working category? Who is that?
Ms. Brower. All of us, depending on the day. Representative Ward.
That's right. These are, Mr. Chairman, Representative, these are responses from a national survey. And so typically what they'll do is lay out the largest reasons. Some people have the luxury of being able to say that they're not interested in working, and that's their reason. Mm-hmm. So, thank you.
Ms. Brower, would that also include people who, for whatever reason, have decided that they can do better with other forms of income support than participating in the workforce? Is that would people with that kind of decision-making go in that category?
Mr. Chairman, This would include self-employment. This explanation for self-employment would be considered part of the labor force. And so I think that would cover those folks as well.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Ms. Brower. I think I asked a confusing question.
Oh.
I read a study this winter. I can't remember what it's from. It's from it's associated with, I think, the Harvard Department of Economics, in which they discussed the availability of public support programs such as disability and the fact that many, especially working class males, can do better in disability payments than they can in the workforce. And so I guess I'm wondering if people who are in that situation would fit into that category.
My sense is that they would fit instead into the disability category if it's been determined that they have a disability. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
So people have many reasons for not working besides the availability of jobs, and that's just the sense that I wanted to give you from this graph here. Across many of these categories, people weigh the costs and benefits of working given what they know about the types of jobs that are available to them and what their own life circumstances present. We've been looking at the percentage of Minnesotans working, those of working age, as a share of the whole working age population. And that's not really a standard way of looking at employment, but I wanted to present those numbers to you so you would get the larger picture as it relates to our working age residents, not just those who are currently in the workforce. It's much more common to look at the number employed as a percentage of those in the labor force, meaning those who have a job or are actively looking for work. And these are the standard employment numbers that we're much more accustomed to seeing. So we can see from these monthly employment numbers that Minnesota is recovering from the recession at a faster rate than the nation as a whole with respect to jobs.
Representative Radinovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brower. Throughout the recession with regard to unemployment numbers, we've heard discussion of people who no longer are seeking work or are no longer participating in the workforce. Could you elaborate on that and if you believe there's a component related to this chart as well?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chair, Representative. Yes, that's true, that discouraged workers is a group that kind of makes some of the interpretations of some of these numbers that we're looking at here a bit confusing, because people can move from actively looking for work to not actively looking for work, and they kind of fall out of the denominator of the number that we're looking at. For that reason, if we look here at this percentage of everyone, of all the bodies potentially available to work, ignoring life circumstances, that gives us a different view and gets around the issue of people moving in and out of that labor force.
Thank you.
Ms. Brower, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman. So we looked at how income, poverty, and employment have changed for Minnesotans over the past decades. I want to turn now to talking about trends in the income distribution here in the state. Again, taking the long view and going back to 1950, we can see that the highest income household groups, those with incomes in the top 20% of the income distribution, grew considerably between 1950 and 1990, while the same was not true for the lowest 80% of households. If we look at what's happened with wages during the same period, we see that wages for the highest 20% of earners has grown, while the lower wage groups, those in the 4 lower quintiles, has remained the same or declined over the same period. So as goods-producing jobs have declined and jobs in the service industry have increased, we've seen very little change in the wages of our lower-income workers.
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brower, could you give us a little background on these groups and sort of the mobility or movement of workers between those categories, and how prevalent is that? Is that a fairly common thing or not?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Representative. To give a good overall picture of mobility within those categories, I think I would like to have a bit of time to look at the numbers and get back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. That would be fine. And I guess another question along with that is when you talk about the top 20% of households, I mean, is that a fairly static number as well with regards to, I mean, I'm assuming inflation is factored in there in some way, and maybe you could include that in whatever you're going to send to us as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Loon, I actually think this whole question of mobility it warrants a partial hearing of its own, if not a whole hearing, just to understand the role that plays. And Representative Radinovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And along those lines, I guess some of the questions I had, maybe we'll get on into them at a later committee hearing, but is what attributes do these groups share? For instance, are there some things we could say about the highest three groups that there's a high percentage of college degrees, or they come from a certain type of background, they have certain characteristics. I don't know if that's something that you're prepared to answer today, Ms. Brower, but certainly it's something that I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Brower?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I will show you at the end of this presentation characteristics of Minnesotans in poverty, low-income Minnesotans, and that's not exactly the same universe that we're talking about, but it's the closest data that we have readily available right now. So it's something that potentially could be examined, but I haven't seen the data specifically on low-income workers.
Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brower, I wonder, too, if, as you're putting these together, if we could have a breakout of men and women, because I think that that's part of what we're going to be looking at.
And Representative Ward, I didn't mention this earlier, but the question of wage disparities, both along gender, race, geographic differences, are going to be the subject of hearings as well. This is, I believe, the anniversary year of a Pay Equity Act, or the first contract of pay equity in Minnesota. So I think that certainly is an important issue for us to take a look at. Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman. I think it's a bit easier to see what's going on with these lower income groups if we zoom in a bit here. So this is the same graph that we were just looking at, the same data, but looking only at the lower three quintiles and below. So here we see in the inflation-adjusted dollars that wages have either declined or remained the same for the past 40 years. Excuse me. There are a number of ways to measure changes in the income distribution, and our office conducted a series of analyses late last year, and they all came to the same conclusion that income inequality in Minnesota has increased over time. This is true for household and wages, wage income. What we've seen across the board, across data sources, is that these higher income households and higher wage earners have increased over time, and the lower wage and lower income households have remained the same or declined. So what we've been hearing about at the national level appears to be true here in Minnesota as well. And in fact, many of our analyses looking at the U.S. and Minnesota, we matched very closely the U.S., the overall trend.
Ms. Brower, just a quick question. Comparing this slide to your previous slide, your income groups and wages, that's a measure of that's not broken out by household, isn't that correct?
Mr. Chairman, the first graph is showing the household income, and then we move into wages in the final two.
So, Ms. Brower, so the second graph related to wages, that's just based on wages paid in the economy to individuals. They're not grouped.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
There have been numerous state-level studies using different data sources, different methods, comparing the changes that have been observed, and they've all come to similar conclusions. This is not an eye test for you today. These
Looks like my
don't
signature.
look too hard. These are the findings of research looking at state-by-state increases in inequality, wage inequality, using tax data, IRS data. And Minnesota is circled there. And I'm showing this to you just to give you the general impression of how Minnesota compares relative to other states, that inequality in income has been increasing for many states, for the majority of states. Over the long term, this goes back to 1916. There have been additional reports by researchers here in the state. House Research, for example, our office at the State Demographic Center, and Indeed have looked into this issue and come to similar conclusions. So each of the findings of the reports shown here, just briefly, found that income inequality has been increasing in Minnesota. And now I'll briefly describe some of the demographic characteristics of our lowest income residents in Minnesota. These are the individuals with incomes below the poverty threshold. As I described earlier, employment and wages are important factors determining whether a resident will fall into this lowest income category. It is this group of Minnesotans who would potentially be most affected by changes to a minimum wage. In 2011, there were about 622,000 residents of Minnesota living in poverty in that year. Nearly a third of them were children under age 18. 60% were white, non-Hispanic, and 40% were people of color.
Mr. Chairman?
Representative Loon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brower, could you, in one of your earlier slides, you talked about, the percentage of people in poverty and that people may slip into poverty for a few months and out. Is this all of those people, or is this people kind of in that category of in poverty for 25 months or more, or is it everybody in the same bag?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Representative, this is looking at a snapshot of all those people at one point in time. So that includes anyone who would be in poverty. If you just take a snapshot in 2011, it would include those who are in poverty for a very short period of time and those for years potentially.
Okay, and thank you, and Mr. Chair. And so when you talk about income, is that so all of these people are working in some capacity, or not necessarily?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I have some data that I'll share with you in a moment that shows the percentage in poverty that are working. There's a fair share that are working or looking for work. Yes.
Representative Loon.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, so some of the people in this are working and some may not be. Is that correct?
That's right.
Thank you.
Please proceed, Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Radinovich.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brower, I have another question here, and it should be an easy one for a demographer, I imagine. Could you just quick sketch out what the percentages of these demographics are statewide without regard to poverty? So what the general population demographics are with minority percentage and people under 18 and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. With respect to people of color, it's about 17% statewide, 24% in the metro area. And I have a graph that I'll share with you. Here, I'm sorry, does it?
Ms. Brower.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. That shows that while the largest share of the population is non-Hispanic white, that the likelihood of being in poverty is greater among some groups, among children, among those with less than a high school education, and single mother households in particular.
Ms. Brower, now are children and those without high school educations grouped together, or is that two separate categories?
Mr. Chairman, this is for the population 25 plus when we're looking at the high school graduation and educational attainment.
Thank you. Please proceed.
This is what the trend looks like for children. for all the age groups with respect to poverty. Again, looking across people who experience poverty for a short time and those for a long time. And you can see that poverty has been increasing, particularly among our youngest residents, and has increased, stayed relatively stable for our older residents, 65 plus, over time. The majority of the working age population who are in poverty, those who are 20 to 64 years old, are either working or looking for work. That is that 42% and 17%, and the remaining are not in the labor force because of a disability or another reason. Among Minnesota's poor families, 69% have one or more workers in the family.
Ms. Brower, can you remind us again when you use just the word poor? Or you're not talking about low income.
This is the official, Mr. Chairman, this is the official measure of poverty. So it's if their income falls below the federal poverty threshold of about $23,000 for a family of four. But it varies somewhat based on household composition and age.
Okay, thank you.
So I presented today a picture of how Minnesotans' income and wages have changed over the past few decades. We've seen that household incomes have declined, poverty has increased, and wage distributions have widened over the long run. Lower wage workers have seen little growth in their wages, and the higher wage workers have seen their wages grow. This concludes my prepared remarks, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer additional questions if there are any.
Ms. Brower, I have one question. On your slide is not, I guess, numbered. It's page 8 as we look at it. You have 622,000 people in poverty in Minnesota, and 42% of those of working age in poverty are employed. Can you give us a kind of a roll-up of the number of people in poverty in Minnesota that less than $23,000 for a family of four who are working? Just kind of a net roll-up of that.
Mr. Chairman, are you asking for a number?
Yeah, Ms. Brower, if you can't do it immediately, but just a sheer number of people who are working and in poverty.
The number is 146,000 are either working or seeking work. So it's going to be closer to 120,000 or so who are both working and have incomes below the poverty threshold.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Oh, Representative Bloom.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Brower, just to delve into that a little bit further, is that working full-time or working for any amount of time?
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, the majority of those in poverty that are working part-time. It's around 70%. So that's much more the picture is a part-time work status rather than full-time work.
Representative Bloom.
Mr. Chair, so working approximately a 70% of full-time schedule, is that what you mean? Or
Ms. Brower.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no, that they're working 70% of the entire whole who are working part-time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any further questions? Thank you, Ms. Brower, and I hope we'll hear more from you soon.
Thank you.
Up next is Dr. Stinson, the State Economist, who certainly knows the drill of these committee presentations, so I'd welcome him to the table.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Tom Stinson. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I also serve as the State Economist. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about the future of jobs in Minnesota. My presentation you might think of as picking up on where Susan's or Ms. Brower's presentation left off. she's talked primarily about the history of incomes and income distributions in Minnesota and jobs in Minnesota. I want to talk a little bit about where we go from here and how things are changing. And things are changing fairly dramatically. I'm going to start, though, with a quick overview of where we've been. Some of this will duplicate what Ms. Brower's presentation was, but the bottom line is that we've been very successful. As she noted, our economy is doing better than the U.S. average in terms of unemployment. Our growth rates exceeded the national average, and our population growth rate leads the Frost Belt. We rank with the leaders on many social and economic indicators, but if you look at if you compare how we're doing now compared to how we were doing 10 years ago or more, we may not be doing quite as well as we once were. But we're still doing well. We're not starting from a position of weakness. Here's my favorite measure of the economy and how the economy is doing, and it's a little different from hers, but the result still is the same, and that is that if you look at per capita personal income, we exceed the U.S. average by 7.2%. In the 1960s, Minnesota's per capita personal income was 95% of the average. Since 1970, Minnesota has grown by 93%. The U.S. has grown by 84%. So over 40-plus years, we've just continually grown a little faster than the U.S. average. The gap has narrowed slightly, though. Earlier in 2006, we were a little bit stronger in there.
Dr. Stinson, Representative Radinovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Stinson. I have kind of two questions here, and I think you had indicated that you like this, the per capita income as a good example of sort of where we sit nationally. My first question is, why would you prefer this to other tools as far as ranking, and what other tools would you consider, or what other measures would you consider when figuring out Minnesota's standing nationally? And the second part of that question then is the growth in per capita income also takes into account, or it accounts for in some way, I have to imagine, the growing divide between that top quintile and the rest of the population. Is that true?
Dr. Stinson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Radinovich, the answer to your first part, or your first question, why do I prefer it? I just think it's better measured. The median family income is largely self-reported. This comes from, and both of them are good measures. I'm not saying they're not. I just think that it's a better measure. It's tied more into the national income accounts in there. There's no income distribution number with this, so this is the total output of, or total personal income of the state divided by the number of people in the state, and it doesn't say how many earned this or how many earned that or anything like that. So that's one of the defects in the measure. But both of them basically show the same thing, that we've gone from being a below-average state in incomes in the 1960s. In 1960, we were 95% of the U.S. average. Now we're 107% of the U.S. average. In the 1960s, on per capita personal income, we ranked 25th. Now we rank 12th. So both of them show that the state has made progress. And I think the important thing to think about here is, why has the state outperformed the U.S. average? And I think there are two reasons why the state has outperformed the U.S. average. The first is on both the median family income number and the per capita personal income number. For some reason, women in Minnesota have opted to participate in the paid labor force to a greater extent than they have in most other states. And so that has made a difference for us. The second reason is, and I'll spend some more time on this, but the second reason is the quality of the workforce, and that relates to investments that the state made in education back in the 1950s and the 1960s, that far-sighted public sector and private sector leaders decided that the way that Minnesota was going to prepare to deal with the baby boom was that they were going to educate them and educate them well. It seems like it's a pretty easy decision to have made if you look back now, but it can't have been all that easy, or other states would have made the same decision and we would have remained more or less the same position that we're in now. And so that's, well, that's 3 more slides than I've gotten through here.
Thank you.
Please proceed.
Here's the slide that summarizes what I just got done saying, that we owe a lot to far-sighted private sector and public sector leaders in the 50s and 60s. It might surprise you, I know it surprised me, to find out that in the 1960s, less than 50% of the workforce had a high school diploma. Now that seems pretty amazing when you think about it nowadays. Now we have 92% of the workforce, that 24 to 64 is having a high school diploma. But you know, in those days, certainly there were a lot of people that came of age during the Depression or during World War II, and so they had more important things to do than finish high school. But still, this is a pretty amazing progression in here. That said, times are changing. What I want to do is follow along using some words that 2 financial market gurus, Bill Gross and Mohammed Al-Aryan from Pacific Investment Management Company, coined a term called the new normal. And this is seems to me kind of summarizes the issues that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about Minnesota's future as opposed to where we've been. And here's the 30-second elevator ride summary of the new normal. First, the Great Recession is over and the economy is growing, but we're not going to return to the economy that we had prior to the Great Recession. We're moving to a new normal, and it's not just in Minnesota, it's not just in the U.S., it's global, and it's going to be an important factor that has to be considered looking on into the future. And the important thing for you and for people in Minnesota is to recognize that those who recognize this, the individuals, the firms, the institutions, and the states, are going to be the most successful. And the next 4 years are going to be critical. The new normal is here now. What's going on is that the economy has changed, and that's been accompanied by a set of demographic changes as well. I could show you a lot of charts on how the economy has changed, but I'll just show you this one that shows you that, one, this was the longest and deepest recession since World War II. This shows a comparison from the last 3 recessions, actually the last 4, because the 1980, 81, 82 recession was actually 2 recessions. And what you can see is that we just haven't recovered to the same extent. We're now about 3% above where we were at the start of the recession. In a typical progression, we'd be somewhere 12, 14% above where we were in there. So that's a quick overview of the kind of the changes in the recession, and the recession has brought on to the economy. And that certainly would have been something that would have created some problems. But at the same time that we had those changes in the economy, we've had some major demographic shifts, and these major demographic shifts are things that need to be considered as well. The big one is that we're getting older. The number of Minnesotans turning 65 increased by 36%. That single age group increased by 36% in 2012. You see that there's just this huge step up. What does turning age 65 have to do? Well, as everyone knows, you qualify for Medicare, and people that didn't retire at age 62 when they were first eligible for Social Security are apt to retire at age 65. And so if you think about it, we're going to see more retirees in there. Now here's a picture of what happens to the age distribution. It's kind of the same story, but there's a twist to it. And the story is, if you look up the upper right-hand corner, you can see that there's about 300,000 more people by 2020 that are going to be in that 60 to 75 age group, the age group where people are either out of the workforce or, if not out of the workforce, getting ready to retire. But I want you to look at the 20 to 25s and the 20 to 29 age group, the lower left, which is the people that are coming into the workforce. And those people are, the number of those people is actually shrinking by 40,000. So we've got a large number of people leaving the workforce, and we've got a smaller number, a shrinking in the number of people coming into the workforce. I should say that these are Minnesota numbers, but the U.S. numbers look very similar in there. So this is not a Minnesota phenomenon at all. What does that mean? Well, it means a couple things that you need to be thinking about for your committee. One is that competition for those entering the workforce will increase. If you have a decline in the number of people 18 to 24, both in Minnesota and nationally, we're not going to be able to provide the employment that we need, the new workers that we need for our existing firms if we don't compete well on a national market. And you can see that Minnesota is shrinking a little faster, that age cohort is shrinking a little faster than the U.S., but both the Minnesota and the U.S. are shrinking. And this is something, brings us to something that's an important thing to be thinking about, and that is what happens to the total labor force in Minnesota, the number of people 16 to 64. And what you see is a steady shrinkage in the growth rate, or a steady reduction in the growth rate. In the 1990 to 2000 period, the labor force grew by 1.5% between 2000 at an annual rate of 1.5%. From 2010 to 2015, it grows only 40% as fast, or at 0.6%. From 2015 to 2020, it grows half as fast as it does between 2010 and 2015, 20% as fast as it did in the 1990s, at only 0.3%. And by the time we get 2020 to 2025, it's growing at only a 0.1% level. Now, these are the kinds of forecasts that are relatively easy to do because these are people that are already born. All you have to do is just age them a year now at a time. Now, there's the possibility that people will work longer, and that's been factored into the forecast by the State Demographer. There's a possibility that there's going to be migration from other states and other countries, and that possibility has been factored in as well. And if you paid attention to obscure releases from the U.S. Census Bureau, what you'd find is that they're readjusting downward in the last month or so. They've readjusted downward their perception of how many people are going to immigrate from other countries to the U.S. over the next decade or so.
Excuse me, Dr. Stinson. Representative Radinovich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Stinson. So as I look at this chart here, and I consider the chart Ms. Brower presented earlier, does this take into account the diminishing number of people participating in the workforce? That, right? Okay. So there's a decline in the overall participation in the workforce. Does this take into account that, or is this simply basically a representation of people as they age, total population?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Radinovich, this is a measure of the total number of people that are in the workforce. And so if your question is participation rates, this assumes that we have more or less the same level of participation rate per cohort.
Okay, please proceed.
Actually, it's assuming for people over the age of 65 that we have a higher participation rate. Okay. I want to make one more point with this graph, and that is that this is not just Minnesota. This is not just the U.S. The U.S. numbers are very similar to this. This is happening globally. Japan has had 2 decades of shrinking workforce. China workforce is growing now, but by 2017, the one-child policy is going to turn around their activity. Europe, much of Europe is already shrinking in workforce. And so this is not a Minnesota phenomenon at all. We need to reset our thinking to take advantage of the fact that we know that this is going to happen, and it's not and to remember that not all that we've learned over the past 50 years is going to hold for the next 50 years. Here's one item that we need to be recognizing and thinking. Always before, people have been focused on jobs, as one former governor used to say. But if you look at the projections are that 2/3 of the employment opportunities that are going to occur in between now and 2020, this says 2016, but there's another one for 2020. 2/3 of the jobs, roughly, are going to be replacement jobs, not new jobs. We need to be making sure that we have the skilled workers in the workforce necessary to fill the demand for skilled worker jobs. Turning a little bit to the issue of wages and income, there are a couple of economic facts of life that I want to talk with you about. One is that it's important to remember that the standard of living in the state depends upon the output per resident, the amount of goods and services that are produced per resident, and that there are only two ways that you get more output. You either have more people making stuff, or you have each person that's working making more stuff by themselves. And I've just shown you that we're not going to have very many more people making stuff, and so we have to be focused on productivity, that more people, more stuff being made per person. And there's a key insight, and the key insight is that if the ratio of workers to the total population of the state declines, we need to make more stuff per person just to stay even in there. Productivity will need to increase. Now, I want to talk just real briefly about one piece of the new normal. The new normal includes a lot of stuff on finance, a lot of stuff on implications for government policy and things like that, but I want to focus on the labor market. And here are some of the things that come out of the new normal when you're thinking about the labor market. And the first is that labor and talent are going to be the scarce resource. This is something that we haven't ever seen before. Always we've been concerned about how do we have enough jobs to provide employment for all the people that want to work. But now that we're going to have this declining growth rate in the workforce, labor and talent are going to be the key. Now that probably seems strange to you with an unemployment rate of 7.9%, but that unemployment rate is coming down and is going to come down much more rapidly because of the demographics than many econometric models would indicate. We're going to have slower economic growth. That's a fact of life because we're going to have less growth in the workforce. And the way that we pick up the growth, the way that we speed up the growth, is by increasing the productivity of the workforce. That's what we're going to have to be focused on, a single-minded focus on productivity. There are going to be an increasing number of retirees, mature workforce. And that's an opportunity. If we're able to somehow encourage people to work some instead of retiring, to work maybe part-time, maybe change institutional structures so that people have the opportunity and it's more, have some incentive to extend their work. That's going to both add to the number of people working, the number of people making stuff, but it's also going to help increase productivity because those people are the people that work, that know what happens. We're going to have a more diverse population. That's going to be a challenge, particularly for Minnesota. All the old rules of thumb won't apply, but which ones won't? That's the question. Leads really to a new 3 R's for economic success in the 21st century. The first is retention. Businesses, states, institutions are going to need to keep their good workers. It's not the 80s and 90s where you can find people off the street to replace your good workers. It means that we're going to need to focus on retaining our youth in the state, keeping them, and we're going to need to focus on the mature worker as well, retaining them to the extent that we can. Recruitment of the workforce to the state is going to be job one for everyone. That raises interesting questions about tuition policy, particularly tuition policy for out-of-state students. And finally, now the third R is retraining. We're going to be needing to retrain, to provide training, to make sure that people migrating to the state have the skill set that state employers expect from the Minnesota worker. We're going to need to protect our brand reputation in there. And we're going to have to think more and more about how do we enable, facilitate the incumbent workforces upgrading their skills. It's not going to be it's not going to be enough to make sure that we have a good share of the most talented individuals in the world, in our labor force. We're not going to need to make the most of everybody's talents, no matter what those talents are, in order to be successful in this new economy, the new normal that we have.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. Real quickly, I want to talk real quickly about productivity. Productivity is not
Dr. Stinson, I was actually going to interrupt you just as you started that slide. We have another committee coming in at 12:30, and they need time for setup. I wonder if, before we start this conversation further about productivity, which I think is, you get more into issues related to education and R&D, I wonder if we could have you back to continue that discussion.
Sure.
Members, if you have time for one or two questions, and people can get something to eat before 12:30. Okay. Well, we are going to wrap up. Thank you, Dr. Stinson and Ms. Brower, for coming to help us get a baseline. Members, we'll be taking your input on standard meeting time. I like 11 o'clock on Mondays. You may not. We may have to find another time, but we will do that. We'll start with Dr. Stinson, and we will get notice out very soon about the substance of the next committee meeting. If there's nothing further, we are adjourned.